think most of you know who I am. My name's Linda Reif. I'm part of the project team for the Oak Hill Parkway project. So thank you so much for being here. We'll go around and introduce ourselves here in a minute, but today we were hoping at the last open house, it was an open house, it was an environmental workshop. At the last environmental workshop, we had some questions on traffic counts and traffic volumes and populations and demographics. I think there were concerns that this project was being built larger than it needed to, based on, I guess, just making sure that the numbers were correct. So we wanted to spend some time kind of doing a deep dive into those numbers, how we got those numbers, why we have to do things the way we wanted to do it. So we brought in a panel of experts today from Campo and Ryan Robinson from the City of Austin. Thank you for being here. Greatly appreciate it. As well as we brought Aaron, our traffic expert with RTG as well. So wanted to answer those questions. We're going to have some presentations here. And then we're going to spend most of this time together just answering questions, whatever questions you might have, and see whatever we need to do to deep dive down into it. We do have a videographer here. If you're opposed to having yourself seen on the video, not videographer, right? The video, let me know, and we'll figure out some way to deal with that. But our hope is that not everybody could be here today, so we'd like to be able to provide that information to whoever in the community might need it. So that's the general idea. Any questions about the process or why we're here today? Okay, Robert, introduce yourself.
Okay. Hello, I'm Robert Tobianski. I'm secretary at OHAN and past president of Aviara community in Oak Hill.
Right, James.
Howdy, James Williams. I'm with TechStop. I'm the project manager for the Oak Hill Parkway.
I'm David Richardson. I've been in OHAN for a long time, Oak Hill resident since 1996. I've been involved in a lot of different iterations of the 290 project.
Karen Sperry, a member of OHAN, representative of a neighborhood closely impacted by the project, West Creek.
I'm Steve Beers, live off Brody Lane, and I am board member of St. Barton Creek Association.
Hi, I'm Joyce Myers with Campo. I oversee our community outreach programs.
Hi, I'm Carol Ficus with Atkins. I support the RMA with public involvement on the Oak Hill Parkway project.
I'm Ryan Robinson. I'm a demographer with the City of Austin.
I'm Wade Strong with consulting firm RTG. I'm leading the consultant team for the project.
Andrew Gonzalez with Campo.
Michael Dutton with Campo. I work with the GIS and some of the demographic modeling data.
And my name's Nirav. I'm with Campo.
I'm Aaron Rosbal. I work with Wade at RTG, basically working for TechStop doing the traffic projections. Thank you.
I'm Oscar Solis, senior project manager with CTRMA.
Good. Bella?
Bubba Needham with Atkins, part of the project team.
Jory?
And Jory Steck, I'm with CTRMA, the communications department.
And we're going to send around a sign-up sheet if you don't mind as well. Yeah, and we'll provide you a copy. I think I can give if you don't want your information shared, don't put it on there. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over. Oh, basically, David, let me flip to this first chart. Alan, I hoped Alan Watts could be here. He had told me if I could plan this meeting before the end of July, he could make it, but he leaves for several months in the summer, and maybe it got too hot for him, I don't know. But he produced a chart that I'm sorry, can we help you out? He produced a chart that he showed at the OHAN meeting that was last there. So I wanted to show that chart there, and this is what it looked like. And David, you said you also have a chart that I don't know if you can explain what what Alan was looking at here. If you want to show your own chart on that, or
The one I have is different.
Okay.
It's showing the projected future is 4.64.
Right, this is a revised one.
This is even higher.
Yes.
And it's later. It was produced later.
That one was produced later?
No, this one.
Oh, but this one was produced later?
Yeah, this one was just released.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So this is what Alan sent, and we're going to talk about these counts counts. And David, do you want to provide any other, like, I know you and Alan had email exchanges about this.
Yeah, I briefly looked at that, and that number of 5.58, or whatever it was, 4.6 something, was significantly higher than my number, but I looked at the difference between exponential growth and cumulative growth and the tools on the internet to achieve that, and what I discovered is there's hundreds of a % difference between the results from those two formulas for calculating growth. And the only thing that I can think of why that higher number is there for Alan is that there was some kind of an error in inputting numbers. I don't know
It
where he
was
got
a
his
year,
numbers.
my understanding.
Yes.
And it was,
Yes.
Actually, Alan answered our question because
Yes.
typically a growth is used compound, like you're saying. He did a straight line calculation. He
Okay.
didn't use compound.
Yeah, and the difference between the 4 and the 5 was that he was using, like you said, he was using a calculation to 2045. And then once you shorten it down to 2040, it goes up.
Right, that was
But
right.
he's using a straight line calculation as an average. Yes.
Is this scale uniform? Like, for instance, I'm just looking at the height of the blue bars as something real, and then the end point of the red bar as being fixed in your assumptions. So even just looking at it graphically, it looks like a greater growth rate regardless of what the number is.
Okay, so I think that's true. There is a greater growth rate based on this number, and I think we'll talk about that. There seems to be some concern about how we got that number or how that all works, and we can talk through what numbers as we go forward. But this is what kind of started this conversation, so I wanted to bring this forward. I was hoping that Alan could explain it in more detail. Do you want to add anything else, David?
No, I don't. I have my own calculations based on similar data, and I did it in a spreadsheet, so it's dynamic. So we can play around with those numbers if we need to get there. And I think that, to me, would be a more useful methodology, if you will, than to use a static chart.
Okay, well, this is kind of a starting point. What I'd like us to do is go ahead and go through the presentation so we can answer a lot of the questions that came up. And then we'll do, when we get to that question and answer period towards the end, and if you've got questions, you're welcome to ask as we go through this. But that's kind of the general idea here, okay? We good with that? All right, one of the things, the questions that came up is why do we need to use the Campo model? Who decides on the Campo model? How does that drive traffic projections and all of those kinds of things? And so with that, I'll turn it over to Campo and let them say whatever they need to be saying. Is that you, Joyce, or is
It's
that
me.
someone else?
It's
Okay.
me.
Okay.
So I just wanted to give you a brief overview of the Campo model, and Michael worked a lot on the modeling for Campo, so if you've got in-depth questions, he can certainly answer those. But as far as just kind of an overview of what the Campo model is designed to do, it's designed to look at a regional transportation system, so kind of bigger picture transportation system. And in doing that, it looks at not only one piece of road, but also the system as a whole. So for example, in the Oak Hill area, it's looking not only at the Y, but also at 290, at 71, at Brody, Southwest Parkway. And the model is designed to look not only at a specific intersection, but also to look bigger picture. So travelers that are coming in from Burnett County, from Hayes County, Western Travis County, it also will look at a bigger picture and consider trips that are coming in even from like Caldwell County or Bastrop County. You've got some travelers that come in like on the Ben White or William Cannon from 71 towards the east, and then they end up at the Y in Oak Hill. So the Campo model is really designed to look at that bigger regional transportation system and factor in a variety of roads in the system as a whole. The next thing, it's designed also to evaluate road improvements and improvements to transit service. So as I was explaining, it's looking not only at one particular road, but also looking at scenarios that factor into one intersection or one road that you're using. An example of this, I know that I've found myself in this situation, and some of you may have also. When there's a crash on I-35, it affects MOPAC traffic and vice versa. So it's looking to see how improvements on one road are affecting the system as a whole, and may make improvements of, an improvement on one road may not necessarily have any kind of dirt turning improvements that you may see somewhere else, but it's still improving that road system in some way by making the big picture improvements to that whole system. Another thing it's designed to look at is the future needs of the transportation system as a whole. So it's looking not only about what we've got going on today and what our needs are today, but the Campo model, we focus on long-range planning, so the model is designed to look 2 decades into the future and consider the kinds of needs that we may have further down the road. It's looking not only at the needs that we'll have, but also growth, and I know Ryan will talk a little bit more about that. So population growth, employment growth, there's all sorts of growth factors that I know Ryan will talk more in depth about. And then the last thing, the Campo model is also designed to evaluate alternative transportation solutions. So looking not only at those of us that are in single occupancy vehicles, but transit improvements or other modes of transportation that may not even exist today, something that may come up in the future. So it's looking at those types of things. One of the examples is the express bus service that'll be coming online soon. On MOPAC, I've actually already seen one of Cap Metro's express buses running in the express lanes on MOPAC. So things like transit improvements on those express lanes, on I-35, eventually probably on 183 North and any other roads. So that's just kind of a general overview of the Campo model, the big picture modeling that it's designed to do.
All right.
Is
Yep.
our questions
Go for it.
appropriate now?
Yeah,
or-
go for it.
Does it have any kind of feedback in it? Like, for instance, if you put a toll on a road, does it affect the demand for that road?
You know,
I'll let Michael answer.
Or
There are-
congestion?
there are-
Is that another feedback?
There's actually, most recently, the last 2 model updates, I believe, they incorporated a feedback loop into the system to where when it reaches a certain level of congestion, it'll iterate back into the generation or into a previous step of the model to ensure that the most viable pathways are being assigned, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it. So,
But isn't that traditional, right?
that is traditional. The Campo model is a traditional trip-based 4-step model, and which is one thing to point out as well, based on what Joyce was just speaking of. Just to take it one more detail, the Campo is trip-based, meaning it tracks trips from one traffic analysis zone or one geography place to another within the 6-county region. So it doesn't really capture individual trips within there. So for instance, if you were leaving your home and you were heading to work, and as opposed to just going directly to work without stopping, you may have a couple stops along the way that you were wanting to make. The model doesn't, the way it's designed at this point, it wasn't really designed to capture those steps. That's an activity-based or tour-based model. And this model is not really designed to do that. So you won't see some of those finer points of travel in such a small area as the Oak Hill area or any specific project area. So there may be some anecdotal evidence of trips that are being made that the model won't capture. But getting back to your question though, as far as it does have the feedback loop in it, and I'm sorry, the second part.
Tolling.
Tolling, it does also capture tolling. There are impedances that are built into the toll system. Now, the current system is not set up, and I can't speak directly to what those impedances are, but they are built into the Campo model. We've had consultants in the past work on the model, and they built, when the tolls were first implemented back in 02 or 04, I believe it was, those were built into the model itself to try and better capture the decisions that people would be making based on tolling.
So overall trip generation is not repressed because of system-wide congestion?
Overall trip generation is not repressed. No, it's not repressed.
So it's just sort of allocating an assumed trip generation on the network?
Based on all the input data, the employment and demographics that are built into the model for the base year, that is built in, and then that is projected out then for the forecast year.
So when one road is full, it goes to another one?
It does, and that's part of the assignment
It
process.
somewhat acts like that with total, some of it to a non-total.
It does.
Okay.
Other questions? Any clarifications from anything that was said from the team? All right, and that's, we've got Campo, right? Okay. I think the next one is traffic projection process, and I think you've got quite a few slides to go through, Aaron, so why don't we let you do that? And Ann showed up, I introduced ourselves earlier, you want to introduce yourself?
Ann Fowler with the Oak Hill Gazette.
Glad you're here.
I'm Aaron Respawn. I'm with the consulting team working for TxDOT. Basically, Michael helped supply the model for me, and I was able to code the facilities, the no-build scenario, the alternatives that we had in our whole study. It was quite a bit of alternatives, a lot of coding, and yes, the model is not as refined to capture all the tiny, smaller local roads. But they got roads like Southwest Parkway, Circle Drive, the major collectors. Those roads are in there. This first slide is just an overview of the area, and we have 290, the major roadways. We got freeways, and we have these little points on the map where there's people who live there, different areas of communities basically, and 290 runs right through it. 290 actually runs all the way to Houston. It's basically a major connection for regional centers. This slide is basically a background on functional classification. So each roadway has its purpose. From freeway all the way to local street, basically the purpose of each, or the function should be, we have mobility on one side versus access. And then you get down in the middle part where it's arterial, and that's sort of a mix in between. But for major corridors like I-35, mobility and throughput is going to be a priority. And there's a reason for this type of hierarchy system. If you look, the heavier roadways are basically the bigger facilities, and you have the small local roads that feed into these roadways. And it's a more efficient way to move people and goods, and it's safer. Yes.
I was wondering what metrics or how you would define mobility and access. How do you define that? What are the metrics?
So mobility is basically the way you move people and goods through a system. You're able to transfer them from one area to the other, and you want to. There's a lot of goals to that, right? There are safety,
the mobility metric might be level of service. It might be number of cars per lane mile.
Okay, so measures of effectiveness.
Yeah. So the metric is what I'm really driving at. What are the metrics of these definitions?
There's a lot we from our team. There's actually a matrix that we have prepared, and the major ones that we pulled out are travel time, which is basically a fairly easy kind of look. How long would it take to get from point A to point B? Travel time we have. Volume, throughput, how many cars are getting through. We also looked at speeds. You don't want to be stuck in traffic. There's actually a whole gamut. I'm not sure.
You have level of service.
Yes, there is.
And level of service, A through F, has certain metrics that are defined by the number of vehicles on a particular lane mile.
Yes, the density, yes.
Yeah, so that captures density, which also should capture, depending on the roadway itself.
Delay.
And, because different roadways have different speed limits.
Yes.
So all of that is captured in the metric of level of service, but it would be different for different road types. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
So a freeway level of service of C, for instance, would have one kind of metric, whereas a minor collector
Yes.
level of service would have a very different type of metric. Is that true?
Well, for freeways, typically you look at density per lane, passenger car per lane per hour. And then for a roadway level of service, you also, so this, you're basically, the highway capacity manual is basically the way you use this, it's sort of a bible of how you calculate these. And we didn't specifically do roadway level of service for the lower level, but we have planning level capacities that we have, and it's actually in the slide.
I saw that. I was probably more confused by the access axis, A-X-I-S, access axis of
So
this
can
chart.
we go back to the slide before this? I think this is where he's talking about the indexes on the,
Yeah, so one of the things that has become an issue for this highway, for the Oak Hill Parkway and Oak Hill community, was we actually specified that we wanted to have access for our community members. And so then the issue then is, well, what is access? How is it defined? How is it used to impact or affect, with an A, the highway design? And one of the wrinkles that we have in the Oak Hill area is, of course, that because of SOS, we do not have a plethora of additional roads. We do not have a road matrix. We have very limited options for travel. And so most of our highway traffic is going to be on 290 and 71 Southwest Parkway. And so the access conversation is impacted by this chart and the limited number of routes that we have in the Oak Hill area.
Okay.
So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the history of this area. In generating the data, and we'll get into it in the next slide, I think it's important to recognize that we do not have as many options for travel in Oak Hill as we do in other parts of the city.
Yes, yes. To give you an idea of my familiar background with the area, I've been part of consulting teams that actually helped develop inputs for the Campo travel demand model. So I've done a lot of travel time studies, 45, all your major freeways are on the Austin areas. I've traveled myself, and I've seen it grow. But yes, there are limited roadways. And I understand that, yes.
Okay. David, yeah, I may speak to it. The evaluation matrix that we're currently honing right now has a pretty detailed section regarding access. Not only we measure the control of access that would need to be purchased along the project, we're also measuring the change in access between, right now you have a divided, mainly an undivided highway where you could take a left on 290 and go, where you got to take a right, go down to the next overpass.
Good point, yeah.
So we're actually calculating those distances and change of access, comparing the two build alternatives against the no build, and all that's going to be disclosed because it will change.
How long is that analysis?
Well,
Is it available?
we've got it done. I've sent out to the team for review. I don't think we want to
they
make it
usually,
available
they
yet.
usually don't, they'll make it available right
Until
before the
the
public
DEIS
hearing.
comes out.
Right, well, to the public hearing, so that's hopefully later this year, first of next year.
Yeah, I
is
saw
when they're
this
looking at
thing
it.
as being conceptual, like defining what the hierarchy is, like.
Yeah, I think you're right.
That's what this is.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
what that is.
This
If
is
you
just
have
to
a
give you,
driveway every 2 feet, you have high
This is-
access but low
Yes.
speeds.
Right.
just to give you
That's what that
the
is.
concept that with a freeway, you can't have a driveway going on.
That's right.
And vice versa.
Right.
So that's what that information is for.
So
But we have gone into great detail in looking at the change in access with both alternatives and the no build, and that information will be provided. And
Okay.
we are taking that very seriously in our analysis because it's very important to the community. We understand that. We've listened and
Yeah.
so we've gone through a real exhaustive analysis of that.
And any freeway is a difference, right? I mean,
Yes.
the idea is.
Compared to what's out there now.
Maybe the longer way around is the shorter way home, if you're able to go at a higher speed. And that's the trade-off.
And you don't get
freeway.
hit by somebody when you're taking a left turn. I mean, it's a very unsafe condition that's out there. I don't think anybody will argue against that. We're trying to make it safe, improve mobility. But yeah, there may be a little more distance that someone will have to take because of that.
But safety's really,
It's important.
it's hugely important. Yeah.
Right, so this is conceptual, and let's move on, and you were talking about these are the major,
Yes.
these are,
And how the roadway basically feeds into these major connections, basically. So basically, if you look at it as your lifeline, your blood vessels going through the network. There we go, next one. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on the calculation of the different compounded growth rate versus a straight line calculation. And Alan was using a straight line calculation.
I was actually using compound or exponential growth.
Yes.
And the difference between the two is minuscule,
Okay.
insignificant.
Well.
And this is fine.
Okay, so yeah, just to get an idea that when we did the calculations ourselves, we'll have different numbers from Alan, but they basically mean the same thing, that there's a growth there, or not a growth, right? All right. And
You guys have do you have this in a handout? I didn't get it.
We can post it on the website.
Okay, all these slides, yeah.
yeah, I can
Thanks.
definitely get that to you.
this is some of the sources I used. You guys are maybe familiar with the statewide planning map. That's where you can find 2007 to 2015 ADTs. And then I was able to get in contact with City of Austin traffic counts. Also, there's text on urban saturation counts, which are on sort of off-system roadways or local streets. And then, also text on Campo's website also had some counts as well.
Let me just say real quick about the Campo website. It's being updated right now, so if you do go to that site and visit, you'll find numbers from 2013, but it's been under some revision as of late, so that'll give you that, but it won't give you the 2015 that Aaron's speaking of right now. But we do have that available. If you'd like, you can always contact me and I can provide it for you.
I was looking around for the city data and I couldn't get to the city data, so I was doing my own analysis.
Yeah.
It's kind of a black box at the city.
I actually spoke with the guy who's been in charge with it. His name is Jerry, and has a wealth of knowledge. He knows what's going on in the city because he's been counting them since the early 2000s. And so I can give you his contact information. And another thing is, what was I going to say? So I was able to also get in touch with TP&P's data management. It's TxDOT's transportation planning division, where they actually have a data from the 90s for the older from the streets, and I can help you with that too. Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Here's the growth rates that I calculate using the compounded growth rate calculation. So on 290, this is our study area. On the west end is Circle Drive, and on the east end is about Mopac. And basically at RM 1826 is a point, and then one just east of William Cannon. The pink box refers to RM 1826, and then the purple box is William Cannon. And you could see that in the early 90s, growth was pretty healthy. Was about 5.6% per year for that 1990 to 2000 or 1999. And to give you an idea, I've been doing a lot of planning studies since my career, and a conservative growth rate is 2%. So if you don't really know what the growth is, but you know there's going to be growth, you say it's going to grow 2%, 2 to 3% maybe. If you know that the area is not growing, it's going to be 1 or 0%, or just 0.8% or something like that. Anything between 3 and 5% is a healthy growth. So this area is developing well. Jobs are coming in, people are moving in. It's growing well, 3 to 5%. Anything over 5%, 5 to 10% there's something going on with this area. It's growing pretty aggressive, really good. And so it was growing pretty fast in the early 90s, and it slowed down basically the last 10 years or so. As you can see, it slowed to 3.6. And this is to 2015. We don't know what 2017. We haven't done a count. It'd be good to do a count just east of William Canyon. But over the 25 years, from 1990 to 2015, you had a healthy growth rate. You had anywhere from 2.5% at William Canyon to 3.4%. All right, next slide. Oh, I just want to point out though, at William Canyon, within the last 10 years, from 2007 and 2015, or 8 years, it slowed down drastically. That was it was pretty stagnant. And that's, you can see that in this graph, in the first slide. So you can see how it's kind of staying around under 60,000. It hasn't really grown actually.
Do you have any idea why subjectively to so many people it seems like it's constant growth, and yet the numbers for several years have showed relative stagnancy? Why?
Oh,
Why is there that optical illusion to the public that is sitting there frustrated?
We'll get there. Yeah.
It's no illusion.
It's no illusion. We'll get in there. Yeah.
Is it just because it gets that bad and then people perceive it as constantly getting worse, even though it's so bad and
there's an actual demand basically that there's a demand of that there's travelers that want to get from point A to point B, right? But there's also this thing called latent demand, where they want to get there, but they have no choice. They have to go somewhere else. And if they can't get through 290, they have to go somewhere else, right? So I wanted to just,
But haven't you seen the same phenomena system-wide, statewide, nationwide?
Yes, this is a normal growth pattern for metropolitan areas.
So it's not going somewhere else. It's not growing as fast, correct?
Wait, hold on. So there's a growth here. It's slowed down basically, is what this last slide was.
Pretty drastic.
Over the 25 years, it has grown 2.5%. So I had to study the parallel roadways. These are the major parallel roadways. B Caves, Southwest Parkway, 45 Southwest, and Slaughter. Pulled the same data. So B Caves in the 90s, it grew 7.7%. And so I was referring to anything over 5% is aggressive. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this route yourself, but B Cave is growing pretty fast in the 90s. It has slowed down in the recent time, but over the 25 years, it's a healthy growth, 4.4%.
Can anybody in the room identify when B Caves was incorporated?
Village of?
Yes.
How would that be pertinent?
Well, it's pertinent this way. If you have a small number and double it, the percentage increase is inflated. That gives spurious information to the analyst. If you have a similar growth in absolute numbers to a larger population or larger growth, it is a more modest number. And when we're looking at 1990 to 1999, my understanding was that B Cave was practically a non-entity. And so if we're looking at 7.7% growth, that high growth could be a cause, or could be caused by a spurious analysis of the information.
So you're assuming that the incorporation of the village then promoted and supported all of the development that came?
Well, it happened. I can't say it supported it, or, I'm just saying that the data could be, that the 7.7% growth rate could be a consequence of a spurious interpretation of the data. If you start out with small numbers and double the numbers, then you're going to get a larger growth rate, like if Chinese economy,
No, I'm right there with you. I'm just not sure I'm on board that the incorporation of the village is part and parcel, but it could have been. But my point to that is that, let's remember those of us who were here, 90, 91, 92 were really quiet. And so back to Aaron's point about that 5.5 being impressive, it's actually even more impressive than that, because that's going to be stacked toward the back end of the decade. I mean, you're going to get a spike in 94, 95, and then it's just, up to 99. So if that's pertinent to the discussion, but I'm with you, those kind of the rule of small numbers and big numbers, for sure. But I think there's some real reality is that you're not going to get additional growth on that because it's just so congested.
Well,
But there's no feedback in the macro model that represses travel, right? That's what they told us.
Right, that was your first question.
Yes.
Okay.
All I'm saying is that without looking at the absolute numbers for the travel demand here, it's difficult to put it in context of the region. And so if you have a growth of, say, 1,000 trips per day at Bee Cave to 360, that might be one thing. But if it's 1,000 trips per day in 1995, might be very different from 1,000 trips per day in 2009.
If you have one person in your town and then it grows by another person, that's 100% growth in 1 year. But if you have 1 million people in your city, it's really hard to grow by a second million in 1 year. Is that your
That's
basic
basically
point?
what I'm saying, and
Yeah.
this data, or this chart, accurate as it might be, might not capture the absolute numbers that might be more relevant to our analysis of traffic demand models.
Okay, I mean, this is just basically a straight calculation, the count from then and now, and then the growth rate that's on this corridor. I wanted to state that basically parallel routes are growing, ranging anywhere from 14% all the way to 2.8% all the way to 14%. It's a very high growth on 45 that I wanted to point out as well. So basically, there is a growth or a demand moving from this west side of Austin to east side of Austin.
And there's also significant development pressure in this area.
Yes.
But it's only really started, say, in the last 15 or 20 years.
Yes, I have data for 25 years.
Yeah, but it only started, say, 20 years ago, or maybe 25 years ago. So
Okay.
all I'm saying, again, is that capturing data, the time period from a period of very minimal development 25 years ago could offer spurious data, spurious percentages.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Well, I basically reached out to TPNP. I said, can you give me the data you have? And
Understand.
there we go.
It's just we need to take it all with a grain of salt.
Yes.
So that the 14.5% growth rate, yeah, it sounds really impressive. But as Steve pointed out, if you increase population from 1 to 2, that's 100%.
Yes.
And so that might not accurately reflect the growth in traffic or the demand upon the roads.
In general, I guess as cities get bigger, they level out over time. They're still growing very large by absolute numbers, correct?
I'm going to talk about that in the slide. So, I agree with that, but to me, that almost becomes an argument of why we're seeing an attenuation of the growth rates recently, because the numbers themselves are so much
Base
bigger.
is bigger. But then does it make sense to stretch that same line out to infinity?
That's the question.
To answer your question,
next.
it was 1987, according to Google. 80.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
This is just another slide for the minor roadways that are parallel to 90 that feed into those major roadways that are parallel. We have Old BKs, we have Barton Creek, Cannon, and Circle Drive. And so they range from about 1.7 all the way to 8%, 8.6%. Which basically circles saying there wasn't much growth on 290, but there was definitely growth on their parallel routes.
With slower traffic growth on 290, and in some cases, looking at your primary source, the TxDOT many of these years, the absolute numbers were actually down, as well as the percents.
You're talking about the recent growth?
I'm talking 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Would people have a different view of it? Like, I drive it every day, it's bound to be getting worse because there's adding traffic signals along there? Would that be accounting for the, well, I see it stack up for 2 blocks, so you can't tell me there's not more cars. That's a common reaction, even though your numbers say there's fewer cars.
Right. Steve, if I could respond to that, and
Yeah.
Ann, you might want to chime in on this too, adding your own personal experience and as well, and Robert, you too. I never drive through the Y anymore. I mean, I find Davis Lane and Slaughter Lane a quicker route to Mopac or where I work in the area. I rarely go 290 except maybe up to the Scenic Brook. Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that kind of your experience as
I
well?
used to live on that side of the Y, so I'd have to go through it, and haven't for the last few years, so I'm able to avoid it just by not living down that way, so I can't really address that.
Well, to address that point is I live off of Old BK's Road, and there's no traffic signal there. We've recently, within the last year and a half or so, gotten some turn lanes there with the cooperation of District 8 City Council, Michael, with TxDOT. But it's still almost suicidal to try and get out of there when people are trying to turn left and there's no U-turn signs posted and they're still turning around. I digress. The continuous flow, the newer construction and the continuous flow has definitely been an improvement over what it was, in addition to the turn lanes in Old BK Road there. However, recently, it has gone right back to where it was. And I mean, the continuous flow construction is very recent. And it was helpful for a while, and the pattern over this summer, and I can only comment to this summer, is noticeably more dense. The traffic is noticeably more dense, where we're backed up on Old BK, for example, and on 290 is backed up toward where Planet Fitness was, which is a significant distance there. It's significantly backed up and more dense in the last, say, 2 to 3 months. Now, I don't know if that's going to be an ongoing pattern. I don't know if it has something to do with, people are out of school. I don't know that, but I can tell you that lately it's really tough. And it takes a while to get through onto the expressway, onto 290-71.
From what I feel that the 2015 improvements did were basically, you added a little bit more capacity, right?
That's correct.
But we had so much latent demand.
We understand, and James and Wade had explained this very thoroughly. This is kind of a Band-Aid, and that was the intention of it. And I think it was great. It was great. The idea was great for a relatively minimal expense, I guess. To do what you did in the period that you did it, I think was outstanding. But now we have to move forward onto this.
Yeah.
The overall traffic numbers on the Parkway, we have some serious issues there.
Yeah, so, OBK.
And safety concerns as well.
OBK's growth, your street grew 6% per year in the last 13
And they're still
years.
building.
Yes.
And they're still building. So, whether or not you think that there's a slowdown in the building of, in that area in Oak Hill, that's only gonna get more dense. They're building more and more for apartments, they're doing some commercial. And I would assume that when you build the Oakville Parkway, if you do, and hopefully you will, it's going to bring more traffic and more commercial and more building, because that's going to follow the route of the highway. People are going to follow the trails.
Right. I think, if I may,
Yes,
I think,
please.
if I understand, Steve, I think you're maybe referring to where we get a dip in this blue data?
Not directly. I have in front of me a spreadsheet that was gotten off of the planning page of TxDOT. And so it struck me that, yeah, there was a number of years for a number of those points where there was actually less. And that's counterintuitive because throughout this period, people are seeing, oh, there's this apartment complex going up, there's this new store over there, there's all this building and dripping. And yet, we see it relatively flat. But I've also read that nationwide, that there was this long period, relatively long period of less rapid growth, and in some cases, actual declines.
Sure.
So it seems to be a broad phenomenon that is not just, I think it's up and down with the economy myself. I think it's the price of gas can be low, but your income's low, so you don't drive. Your income can be up, but the price of gas spikes, so you don't drive as much. And so I think this is just personal opinion. And the reason we can't see it is the same reason we can't see the world's round. We don't know how long the line we're stuck in is. And we don't have a stopwatch to say, well, in 1990 it was 2 seconds longer to get through this light. We just don't have that perspective.
Right.
So that's why I think
Yeah.
you look at the buildings and you think this must mean more traffic.
Sure.
And it doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, so, and that's a great point about the economy. I think something else that's in here though is that we did have some construction activities, on 71 for pretty significant length, and I think
And that adds congestion too. It's like there's one thing to have the number of cars per day.
Mhm.
There's the amount of time that it's congested.
Right.
That's different.
But I think that some of that when there's construction, I think people maybe avoid the area, so they find another way to go. So that may be why.
So you're still going on the premise there's just as much travel, it just takes different routes.
I believe so. I believe that there is that demand in the area that is coming through this area needs to go somewhere.
This gentleman's point and what we have right here.
Right.
Except that David said we need to look at the absolute numbers, not just those percents, right? To really get a good picture. Okay. So we all agree on that. Okay.
So with that, before you all agree on that, because that sounds like an action item to me, do we need to have absolute numbers, or can we get absolute numbers? Is
I
that
can give you the
something-
spreadsheet I used.
Okay.
It has the numbers.
One of the questions while we're on this point is that Bruce Melton, who couldn't be here, said that on the tech stop planning map, which I think we're pulling some of this data from, he felt that in 2015, AADT transposed on US 290 for the segments either side of William Cannon, and he felt like this effectively creates a large increase in traffic from 2014 to 2015, where he felt that there was none that existed. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, Aaron, or not, but that was...
Basically, on the planning map, when you click on the location on 290, there's a point there, it's about 63,000. And when I clicked on it, it basically gives you from 2007 to 2015. And it sort of brings a couple points there that James mentioned that it was dropping in the early, or like 2012, 2013, 2014, and it was dropping. And then right when you hit 2015, it went up 19%. And the improvements were in place.
I did not capture 2015 in my data, but I captured a number like at 6 or 7 different data points of those same periods of time. And so when I get to my presentation, I can show that what the growth rate on numerous points in the Oak Hill area looked like.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
But basically, to kind of, the numbers were in the high 50s prior to the construction. And then when the construction hit, it went to the low 50s per day, and vehicles per day. And then right after that, it just jumped right over 60,000. And I didn't see any, transposed volumes because we were already staying around 60,000 prior to the construction. So from it to go to 63, I didn't see that it was going to be such a big jump.
Well, I saw something where it looked like it was consistent that as you move from like the easternmost, like Loop 1, that it was higher. Then in Industrial Oaks a little bit lower, then William Cannon lower, than the Y. And so it was this clear pattern. But then at some point,
Went back up.
they flipped a position where William Cannon got more than the other ones. I think two things might have happened. Is one, there might have been this reversal that he mentioned. Might have been. The other thing might be that the industrial oaks number counts only the main lanes. And so that is possibly the source of the quote error. But the one thing that is confusing, there used to be consistent numbers reported separately between the Y and William Cannon. That is of great interest to, I think, the community, because that's where the major natural resources are and some of the design issues. And that was reported as a separate number through the 90s and into the 2000s, but then it sort of drops out, and it's really hard to tell, did it migrate to something else?
We can ask.
There's a one data point for this last year, or 2015, that's on there, but there's this big gap. So if you had some numbers like that,
You
that would
mean
really
like
be
a
great to
location
find.
between the Y and William Cannon? Yeah,
Yes.
it's not on there. We can ask TPMP
No,
or.
It is,
But it's only a single year, and yeah.
no, it's not. I've captured that data from 2007 to 2014, so I
Okay.
have
Where
data
did you
points.
find it?
I went through the textile period, and it was actually the period, let's see if I can, oops, sorry. Went to the wrong thing. James, you can look
Yeah,
at
Bruce
this.
has some numbers, but I couldn't get any reference from him before.
It's the statewide, and I did a screen capture, and this is the segment from the Y to Fitzhugh Road. And
Why
it's,
William Cannon?
yeah, it's route ID ISO 290-KG. And I was able, this is just a simple,
Oh, I see it. Yeah.
so, you know, I used this data for historical data and projections, because it has 25-year projection, or 2034, from what it was in 2014 to 2034.
Okay, yeah, there's another level on there that the statewide planning map has that just gives an estimate of 2034, but it's just using an assumed background 22%, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I recognize that, and we'll get there.
Okay.
So continue with your
Let's
presentation.
let him finish, and then
Yeah.
we'll get through the presentation, and then David will.
Well, anyone who can give me that would be wonderful.
Okay.
We'll work on that,
We're
Steve.
talking about by the cliffs there, by the bluffs.
Yep.
This slide just gives you an idea of magnitude of the historical growth that I was able to pull. And some of these range are from 13 and 20 years of the available data that I had. And just looking at it, so if you see like 45 is very thick because there was almost 10% growth there. And then as you get to Southwest Bee Caves and Southwest Parkway, they're a little bit thicker. And then you have some really high growths on old bee caves, and then you have a thin line on 290, just to give you an idea of sort of magnitude through the area. This slide was a summary of a survey that was taken at a previous open house for the area community, and basically the question was what routes do you take to avoid the Y. And there was basically these routes that were also suggested. So the data supported what the community actually suggested.
And this is effectively the latent demand that you're speaking of.
Yes, exactly.
Is it latent or is it materialized? It's just on a different route.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd call it late.
So latent demand is basically what I mean, we can find a definition, but what I've been taught and what I've been using in industry is basically a traffic or a traveler wanting to get to a point, and it typically would want to use a route, but it can't because of congestion, so it has to find another route to get there.
Ryan, you were saying you wouldn't use that term?
No, I want to defer to his definition of it. To me, latent would be where you would go out and you'd add a bunch of capacity and you would encourage travel that wasn't even in the system at all.
Okay, that's I refer to that as induced traffic. Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
thank you.
So
That's
it's
a good
latent, not
clarification.
induced.
Yeah, induced is you
That's
kind of pull
clarification.
traffic that was not necessarily wanting to take that route, but hey, there's a capacity, let's do it. That's
Right.
induced.
Thank you for that clarification.
Would you think that the improvements are in some respects self-defeating because of that phenomenon?
Not sure.
You can never build a road too big. That's your professional opinion.
I'm not saying that, I'm just saying, I'm stating the volumes, what they are. I'm trying to put words to it.
So Steve, just for clarification, we did not say that. Okay, so you did the same mathematical problem?
Yes, I did it, and the resulting compound rate was, the way we got these projections wasn't, we didn't plug in, hey, let's do 3.5%. It's based on this four-step model that Michael suggested. The projected jobs, projected population, it creates estimated trip matrix from one area to the other.
But do you have a fifth step in terms of feedback with tolling?
Yeah, so there is a feedback system to get equilibrium, basically.
Right.
And when you
But that's still that still works on this corridor, right? This is only looking at one corridor, is that?
No. So like,
I mean, this chart is only looking at one corridor.
yes, this chart is one quarter,
Okay.
and there is a feedback system that takes into consideration the impedance of a toll.
Mm-hmm.
I want to
Does it
point.
mostly go to the frontage road?
Yes. This slide basically wants to show that there is a growth, and it looks misleading because you have such a a stagnant growth, and then all of a sudden it goes up high. But I want you to point out that rate is not high for this area. It's actually expected. You saw the growth rates were over 10%, and that's a healthy growth rate, 3.5%. And another thing is that these are two different types of facilities. We're talking about a 4-lane divided with a 2-way left turn lane, compared to a freeway. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar what type of volumes freeway could carry, but 290 just getting closer to Mopac, and towards 290, you're already getting 165,000 already. And in some freeways that are really congested, they can go up to the couple hundred thousands. So that's where we are. And to give an idea of how much traffic is being added on the main lanes, you have about 90 on the main lanes, and then about 60 on the frontage road.
In your projection?
Yes.
What would that be comparable today? I-35?
290 just inside or just west of 35. It's about 165. Yeah, 160, 165 in that location.
Between Mopac and William Cannon, is what you're saying? 290 there?
It's 290 just west of 35.
Oh,
35 up north.
Oh, up north or
Up
Benmark?
north.
290 east or 290 west?
290 east or 290?
It's 290 west.
So is that
So Ben
still
White
up
Boulevard.
north?
Yes.
Down
Yes.
towards Maynard?
Yes.
So, and that's current year, right?
Wait,
You're
let
comparing
me-
current year to?
No, I think we're talking about two different locations. Let me
two
see if there's a map.
Are you talking about Ben White?
He's talking about the piece just south of Highland Mall.
Okay, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Now I'm not sure what he's talking about.
No, it's right here.
Right there, okay, so that's Ben White.
Ben White.
Oh.
Use that high-tech pointer.
Hey, you gotta take care of business. I was at a meeting just recently and they had a pointer on the remote. I was like, wow. Yeah, okay. There we
How
go.
does this growth rate compare with the one that's was used in the original EIS?
I'm not sure
I
what
mean,
that
I
is.
looked up the original EIS and it's saying in 2005, it was supposed to be 60,000 car trips a day at 1826. And it actually was 50% lower, was 40,000. And similarly, it said from the Y to MOPAC, they didn't divide it up there, that it was going to be 103,000 trips per day. And
Oh, I think.
Still not there.
What projection was that for? Like 2010?
For 2007?
It's 2005.
2005, okay.
Is that a different model?
Yeah, it was the old,
Whole different.
that was a 1986 EIS.
Oh, okay.
Right,
Yeah.
so
I
there's a
didn't-
precedent for generously estimating the future.
I'm not sure you can call that a precedent, Steve.
Um,
That was also assuming the improvements would be in place. You can't get 100,000 cars through that existing road.
Yeah.
Well, why choose any, I mean, pick a number, 3.5, 4.5, 8%, 20%, 10%, 1%. What justifies any particular number if we're talking about the unknown future? You're obviously not projecting it on a basis of the blue bars, so how would you justify it other than this is our long-standing plan, the same plan we had for that 86 EIS or 88 we're using for this one?
Well, they're coming off the traffic serial zone level, long-range population employment forecast as a starting point and feeding that into the network. So that's the big difference.
There's a lot.
Facilities changing.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into the demographics on a forecast.
So it's not like they're taking that and, going, what's going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the small area based forecast that is the beginning point of it.
Well, I don't know if we're all that advanced from then, but maybe we are, but then in that case, weren't they projecting populations then? And it seems like, I don't have them in front of me, but it seems like they're probably in line. Let's see, they said the city in 2005 would be 765,000. It said Travis County would be 854. It said the 3-county MSA of that time would have been 1.2. And, I think, the assumption that everything goes in line with population is down to this quarter level appears to be not exactly correct. That the population and traffic don't grow absolutely in step. Any more than our water consumption, they said, our per capita water consumption is going to shoot through the roof. No, it's about the same as 1980. Energy, we need 5 times more power plants. Well, we don't. So in 2000, and so these exponential growth gets very big numbers. And there's a lot of assumptions that goes into extending the trend line. But the thing that's interesting to me is the trend evidently changed, at least for the period of the blue bars, but we're not changing our result. We're not changing when we think we'll need it.
Aaron, I think it'll help if you keep going through your presentation because your next step helps to answer that.
All right. So to give you an idea of what the capacities we're looking at based on the highway capacity manual, for a 4-lane facility is approximately about 34,000, 32 to 34. And that's just looking at a 4-lane boulevard section typically. There's not a lot of improvements to it. You were probably experiencing in the early 2000s congestion already because it was already past 34,000. Over time, TxDOT has done minor improvements like turn lanes, traffic signals, signal timing jobs. You were able to get more traffic through. In the 2010, 2011, we were capping out or observed traffic around 60,000 vehicles. There was no more cars that could get through the Y, on 290. In 2015, there was a count that exceeded that, which shows that that there was a significant growth right after the construction, about 19% from 2014 to 2015, and it surpassed the 60,000. And it's 63 now. Would like to definitely get a new count there to see what traffic is getting through, but it may be congested again, so probably not as much, or it could be a little bit more than 63. To give you an idea of what the capacity of that we're building into this is for a 6-lane freeway. It's approximately 156, 155, just under 160,000 vehicles per day. And this is the entire facility, frontage roads and main lanes.
Definition of 6-lane freeway, is that 6 lanes in each direction, 3 lanes in each direction?
Oh, 3 lanes. It's a total 6 lanes.
Three main lanes each direction plus your frontage roads.
Okay.
Which I think are a minimum of 2 each
Yes.
direction, some places it's 3.
I just wanted clarification on this. Thanks.
So, we're planning for this demand to fill in this roadway, because we've seen the growth on all these parallel roads and in the area, and over the 25 years from now, it's gonna grow. Is what's my opinion. To give you an idea of travel times, so part of this regional model, it's forecasting regional growth from one large area to the other. To get down to a micro level, you would develop a micro simulation, in which I did. I made a micro simulation of the corridor and the frontage road system of the existing facility in our area, and I was able to compare the no build and then the 2 alternatives that we have and see. And you could compare on the frontage roads and on the main lanes, and these are travel times between Circle Drive and Fredericksburg, Old Fredericksburg. And those are the bar charts basically of the travel times in minutes. And you can see alternatives A and C just have more favorable travel times.
What is the distance?
It's about 3.7 miles.
3.7 miles in 3.5 minutes?
Yes.
So,
it's about 60, 65 miles per hour.
Okay, so is that during what segment of the
Day?
Peak hour
days?
These are peak hour travel times.
Okay.
And so I did one also for State Highway 71 as well. From Silver Mine, just north of Scenic Brook, and then all the way to Old Fredericksburg.
So is that, again, 60, 65 miles per hour?
I actually don't remember I think it was a mile and a quarter, 1.25 miles. And I didn't do the calculation now to get the speed.
It may be a little bit slower.
It's a little slower. Let me see. So we got 6.5.
Yeah, because it's not all main lanes. You've got some, 71 really is a divided highway with connectors.
Yeah, so you're coming on 71, and then you could, if it's main lanes, you would get on the DCs, the direct connectors, to get to the main lanes. And if it's on the frontage road, then it's stay on the surface road. Yeah. But yeah, I can get back and do the calculation right now.
No, I was just curious to estimate the level of service that we're talking about in travel density.
Yes, to give you an idea.
In 2040, if we're anticipating 60, 65 miles per hour traffic, then we're probably looking at level A-level service, level of service A.
I haven't done the HCM calculation for level of service to get the densities, but I could, can get back to you on that if you need that.
Okay.
I don't want to state what level of service it is right now.
Yeah, I don't want you to say something that could turn out to be inaccurate.
Yeah.
I understand, that's fine.
But I would say, typically free flow speed is in the 70s, 70 for a freeway.
Yeah, it's 3 AM on Mopac. Okay.
Not necessarily.
Not anymore.
Well, you got construction there, all right.
All right, we need to keep
So you
moving.
think there won't be any latent demand side? That will serve all the projected demand in 2030? What is it, 2030 or 2040 you're modeling to?
Those are 2040 peak hour volumes, is what I modeled. Yeah. Your question is, I
So if
don't,
we live that long, we'll have a really uncongested, easy travel.
that's theoretically the model shows that, yes.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I think that's the last of my slide. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Two people have stepped in. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, and I apologize for being so very late. This is Carol Cespedes, and I did not pay enough attention to the address. I was thinking south. I actually visualized the textile office.
Sorry about that.
So I'm so sorry.
No, it's
I'm
fine.
been active in the community and in Ohan.
Yeah.
And, you know,
6290.
yeah.
And Michael also stepped in?
Yeah, I don't have a good excuse for being so late, but I'm Michael Searle. I'm in Councilman Rowan Foxboro's office.
Thank you. All right, Ryan, take it away.
So I've got a couple of slides, and they really are intended to speak to the macro sort of level of growth that we're experiencing, that I think that we're going to continue to experience. So I'll start with that. It's the latest data from the Census Bureau, which indicates that the Austin MSA, right, metro area, which is in the Census Bureau definition of 5-county collection, so it does not include Burnett, even though I expect the inclusion of Burnett County at some point in the MSA, because it is becoming so much more attached as Marble Falls continues to attach itself to Austin, the Bureau will bring them in. And kind of to your point, the point we've been kicking around is that, so Austin has been growing, and we've been the fastest growing large MSA in the country for 5 years running. And the absolute growth has been amazingly constant to me, bouncing between 53,000 and 58,000. And so to us, that's almost 3% annualized growth. But for Houston, when Houston grows at 2.2, that's a net gain of 160,000 people. And so it's a big, big difference, the law of small and large numbers. But so, you know, why is this happening? I think we were last in, first out of the Great Recession. Even since 2011, we've had a very vibrant economy. Our job growth, you know, you talk about how projected traffic counts are, you know, really high at 5%. We've had job growth above 4% for almost 4 years. That's unprecedented. And that has slowed a little bit, thankfully. It's slowed probably because of supply side constraints. You just can't hire enough people to keep growing at that growth rate. And this to me is, I think, one of the most significant pieces of information that my office is dealing with, and that's this constant, almost near constant level of metropolitan growth is really being dispersed differently today than it was 5 years ago. So you look at that first kind of piece of this 5-year period from 2010 to 2011, and Travis County got the lion's share of that growth, almost 60%. I think that's a function of a lot of things. I mean, if we were developing a project and we proposed it in central Austin, we got funding for it. The big suburban single-family home builders, even back in 2011, would struggle to get funding for big projects. And so over this 5-year period, it's really completely shifted. So this market share of population growth has left Travis County. Of course, Travis County is still growing, but where has it gone? Well, you would expect it in Williamson, but to me, the bigger surprise is how much market share Hays County has picked up. And this, to me, is a piece of the narrative that I think indicates, bear with me, that Austin and San Antonio, the two areas that are really so close to each other, they've almost ignored each other historically, they're finally beginning to sort of look at each other and interact. And if that's true, then I think those two in-between counties, Hays County and Comal County, are going to receive an enormous amount of growth. The one sort of missing ingredient from my perspective is big employment growth in Hays County. And that's beginning to happen, and once that does happen, it really will be explosive. I mean, that's kind of the one constraint that you're seeing. So that shift,
growth?
this is just pure population growth. And then you can even see it, I don't have the data to share today, but when you look at it at the city level, last year the city of Austin's take of regional total dropped all the way to 30%. The lowest take, I think, that's ever occurred. And that's happening because of affordability pressure. And so kind of, when I'm looking at these maps, I mean, we have to remember that so much has changed in the last 15 years. And one of the big things that's changed is how much more expensive it is to live inside Austin. And so that is a pressure outward. It's a change that affects that freeway system. And so that's kind of what I would call a shift in share. And then that's a map I made, and I'll admit it was the first time I'd ever put Austin and San Antonio MSA together. It's pretty amazing. And that's growth, and you can really, what I see is a very strong correspondence with kind of the macro corridor that's coming between the two MSAs. And just, I think it's kind of a snapshot from the future. I think that's what we're going to expect, is explosive growth in Hayes and Comal County. You can see that in data points coming out of the Braunfels. There are a couple other things that will corroborate that. But then at the heart of this is commuting flows. And it goes back to my point about how kind of the thing I'm waiting to see, and hopeful, I guess I admit, that we'll see more employment growth in Hayes County, is because right now, of all the commuters that touch a toe in Hayes County, which más o menos about 105,000 people, you've got three distinct types, right? A commuter that comes in from outside of Hayes County, so that's the 32,000 roughly. And by the way, you do have a pointer here. It's pretty cool. It just does not, it gets completely absorbed by that screen. So it's green, it's nice, but for whatever reason, the screen's absorbing. And then that middle group, the smallest number, that 17,400, those are folks who live and work in Hayes County. And then here's my big point, is look at all those folks. Over half, roughly half of all commuters in Hayes County leave the county. And so that, to me, from a somewhat simple demographic analysis standpoint, that's one of the big drivers and one of the big motivations of why I would argue, and I'm not a transportation guy by any means, but I think that we do need increased capacity because of that commuter flow. Yes, sir?
Brian, could you go back a couple of slides, please? One slide maybe, no, forward.
Sorry, I know you want to see the map.
The map, yeah.
I keep pointing that screen, it's probably, there it is.
There we go. I think it was the Campo 2035 plan that offered a population growth number, a projection for Hayes County of 101,000 homes in 50 years. Do you remember that number?
I do not, sir.
That doesn't sound like something that Campo would have, a 50-year horizon is not something that Campo would usually put into their plan. We work on 20-year horizons, so I'm not real sure where that number come from. And also, there could have been some studies that were done outside of the plan itself that maybe you had picked up on, possibly. But just the fact that that's a 50-year horizon makes me wonder if that really comes.
And remember, the Campo forecast is entirely built on the state data center forecast.
Correct,
and,
we use control.
Every time we do a forecast, the big decision is what scenario do we go with? The state's data center produces three scenarios: a no migration scenario, a 0.5 scenario, and we're going to take half of the migration rate in the last decade and apply it, and then the so-called 1.0. Right. That's really the hard decision, because even in a past scenario, we did a blended mix where we kind of got in the hybrid, and that to me was not so kosher. Mm-hmm. But so that's the hard decision, at least to start the simple point. But back to your point, so are you citing a statistic that you feel is unrealistic?
Well, I don't know if it's realistic or not. I just remember Sandy Baldridge, who was the president of OHAM a number of years ago, spoke to development in Hayes County out past Oak Hill, and she said, or maybe it was all of Hayes County, and she said there's something like 117,000 lots that had been platted in Hayes County, which would anticipate a substantial amount of growth. I don't know, the last time you guys were out 290 driving out to Dripping Springs or out 1826 or Wimberley, that whole area is exploding. And the Salt Lick owner is developing, I think, 8,000 living units out towards 150 and 1826. This was reported in the Statesman, I believe, and maybe even the Gazette. Do you remember anything about that? anyway, I've heard, I think it was Impact News, yeah, I think it was Impact News. And so I just wondered where the growth numbers actually were for this potentially latent demand in the 290 corridor going out towards Dripping Springs, because that's where most of our traffic will originate, it appears. And so looking at your map here for Hayes County along the 290 corridor,
It's the lighter shade.
yes, the lighter share less than 100, and yet when I look at the Dripping Springs long-range plan, that identifies the area closest to Travis County having the greatest growth in living units and apartments and other things. You go out by Belterra, and it's exploding out
It is
there.
exploding. So a quick note about the data, the map, I built it using American Community Survey data for zip code, and here's where it gets a little bit muddy. So those are what are known as 5-year composite data. They're really, and I'm breaking a kind of a rule by even making the map with that, but it's accessible. So it's not like a point in time where I'm able to say census 2000, census 2010. Those are really rock solid numbers, and I'm doing a point in time comparison. So I'm kind of doing this thing that's not so kosher by taking 5 years worth of composite data, but I slide it back and I take the 2010 version, which is really 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then I slide up and I take the 2015, which is really 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. It's maddening. When you map this stuff at like even downtown Austin, it shows stagnant population or population loss for block groups, and obviously we all know that's not happening. So that gray period, that gray piece of the zip code, I would argue is just sort of a data artifact. I'm trying to make a visual that supports really kind of the argument that you just made. Hayes County's blowing up, and census data are not the best data to use to capture that magnitude and velocity, but I think it paints the picture that, and I'm trying to make the argument that within the bigger scale, I expect an enormous amount of growth out of Hayes County. Now, how the traffic engineers get that growth into the job center, that's up to you guys, but I'm pretty confident that we're going to see enormous growth. And I think, to me, the narrative that you've described completely supports that.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you, because I think that is what's happening. And when we're looking at the highway and development of the capacity of this highway through Oak Hill, where is this traffic coming from? Is it commuter traffic? That's basically what we have to address. And is that traffic originating in Hayes County, working in Austin? And as your next slide points out, the one with the circle, how much of that is going to remain in Hayes County? And one of the things, I'm a handyman, you can probably guess that from the way I'm dressed. I work out in that area, and there are a lot of highly educated folks. And when you look at employers like AMD, their whole premise for moving to Oak Hill was that Oak Hill was the centroid, if you understand that concept, of where their employees lived. More employees lived in Oak Hill than anywhere else in the city. So they developed a plant or a campus in Oak Hill to serve the shortest commutes for the general population of their employment. I just question whether we can expect to anticipate new employment centers, and you touched on this just a moment ago, in Hayes County, where you will see employment coming because there are all these highly qualified, highly educated folks who are entrepreneurial and expect some kind of an employment center out towards Dripping Springs instead of expecting them all to come through Oak Hill.
I think that will happen. And so when that happens, I think what will change will be those shares of who comes in, who wakes up and works, and then who leaves. But the absolute numbers are still going to be vast, I believe, that will feed this. And people are going to be using 290 that are coming from, we haven't talked about counties west of Hayes, but I think they're going to contribute to that as well. So I think all of that happens. Again, I just kind of for the health of the region, I very much want to see Hayes County capture new employment centers. And I think that will happen as we multi-nucleate. And in my slide where Travis County loses market share, I think that's a strong indication that's what we're seeing. And that's what cities do. I mean, they multi-nucleate, they do it for survival reasons. And kind of that's why I initially sort of have been interested in this project, is because I think that's the purpose that it serves. It's a connector. It's not just about growth in Oak Hill, obviously, but and I think you guys get it. It's about growth that's happening.
The exurban growth.
Yep.
And I think I hope those in the room understand that concept, that exurban growth is what's driving growth in the region at this point. Because all I hear on Impact News and stuff in the Statesman was that everybody's moving to the suburbs. Okay, well, looking at the Oak Hill community and how it was looked upon as a town center during the neighborhood planning process, and that was nixed for some crazy reason. Now we have significant commercial development just outside the city limits on 290, Belterra area. And there are so many doors out there that we can expect to see more significant employment growth and commercial centers that would actually make local transportation more attractive than coming into Sunset Valley to do our shopping or Barton Creek Mall. And so the challenge here, I mean, there are a lot of people that are leaving the Oak Hill area to go to Bee Cave or even to Dripping Springs because you can't get through the Y. So they're finding other routes, they're finding other destinations to do their shopping or go to school or even go to work. The challenge that I have for you, Wade, goes back to the level of service conversation for this highway. You are saying that the level of service is going to be a level of service 60, 65 miles per hour in 2040.
In peak rush hour.
In peak rush hour. And yet the maximum throughput of vehicles actually happens at a much level service C or even D. You have more throughput at that level of service.
Capacity, E.
Yeah.
E.
So is it possible to address the same traffic volume at level C in 2040? Instead of addressing a level of service in 2040 at 65 miles an hour. And I think that speaks to what our community has been talking about. This project is overbuilt.
So David, one of the things, as one of those people that went downtown, if you leave at 7 o'clock in the morning on 290, you're going to come to a very near stop at Loop 360. So if you take away all those stops that controls traffic to that area, you're going to get traffic getting much more quickly to that backup, which makes me wonder, yeah, you're going to have more capacity, but that bottleneck or that stop at 360 now is going to get closer and closer to Oak Hill. So I don't see that you're going to get to the bottleneck faster, but you're not going to get downtown necessarily any faster.
Right.
So how do you fix that? It doesn't do any good if we have the capacity to get to that bottleneck if you don't fix it down the road for them to get downtown. So, yeah.
Or find alternative employment centers so
Yeah,
that
but
people are.
they have no control over that, and so, yeah.
That's a
Yeah, we
land
saw
planning
that
issue
phenomenon.
that people like Alan Troxclaw should address.
Ryan, you were going to say?
I say, we've seen that phenomenon before when 183 increased its capacity, all of a sudden MoPac was just overrun, and it was because of that very thing you just described.
Right.
And I think that goes back to the fact that these guys are modeling it at the network level. Stephen's questions about kind of, tolling and congestion, I think certainly that's the intent of a tram plan model. But can one of you guys speak to that, or?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I wanted to say about the model was that it looks at all, for one thing, you mentioned the population earlier, as far as we operate under control totals, and we have to, our board, after they've been vetted, have to go through and actually approve those control totals based on the state data centers forecasts, and Ryan had alluded to the 0.5, the 1.0, and then or the 0, the 0.5, and the 1.0. And traditionally, we've always gone with the 1.0. I've been with Campo since 1999, and for 3 or 4 updates now of the plan, and it's been traditionally, except for the one event where we had, each county has a different sense of how they want to grow, so their representatives would want to see different rates of growth, and we did a hybrid system at one point, but for the most part, regionally, we're 1.0 growth. When that information goes in, it produces a varied number of trips, and there are a lot of wheels turning behind the model that I'm not completely able to explain, but that I understand that the trips are produced through various submodels based on employment and population. And so you have all the trips coming into the region, and we also have internal trips, as Ryan has shown here, all the internal trips on his map. It balances these trips, though, and that's the one thing you have to remember. We have X number of trips, and these trips are all balanced within this 6-county region. So if you have growth or you have development in one area, you were alluding to this too, if you go in and you develop the Y and you increase the Y for 20, so at 2040 you have a certain level of service, which I'm not real sure. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers to make sure that you're actually looking at the level of service at peak congestion. For everything that I've seen, we're never going to be able to get ourselves out of congestion. We're always going to be a congested community, regionally speaking, but it does affect various areas. So when we're balancing all these trips in the model, it affects everything regionally, not just specifically to one project here or there. And I kind of lost track of where I was going with this, but just to say that the model, once again, going back to what Doy said, the model looks at everything regionally, and it is difficult to take those numbers and take those trips, much as Aaron has done, taking all those trips and boil it down into a very local issue for like the 290 to 71 area. These are the best numbers that we have, and they're based on a vetting process that goes through many months of work, and to forecast out for 20 years is always difficult at best.
And Joyce, going back to Ann's question, there's a list of projects in the Campo plan. How does that address some of this?
And so I know you were talking about bottlenecks kind of further up the road, and so there's a number of projects in the Campo 2040 plan, things that are already being looked at now that can address some of those bottlenecks. So what is being considered today, like I was talking about earlier, it's looking at a regional transportation system, not just one small local area. And so Oak Hill Parkway may happen, and then there'll be other improvements like you were talking about, Ryan, with 183 dumping traffic onto MOPAC. Now MOPAC is being improved so that it can absorb some of that 183 traffic that's coming onto it. So there's always going to be improvements. That's not to say there will never be bottlenecks, but there's always going to be improvements. Like Michael's saying, it's looking at that big picture, whole system to see what else can be done to keep improving.
Right, can they be synced up? Because you know that that's where the bottleneck is right now. And now you're saying, okay, now we're gonna have a whole lot more traffic that I can't even see going at 60 miles an hour because now you're gonna move that bottleneck to Y, and people will still, even though there's no traffic there, I mean, it's just gonna back it up. So if you know that's happening, you're gonna have a lot more unhappy people who said, you had us spend all this money and we're not getting anywhere. So if they can sync up, I think it'll be more successful.
Yeah.
I just want to point out, so the model that I have is just our study area for the micro simulation. The travel times that I reported were basically a study area pulled out, from the greater network. So cars are coming in through our network and leaving. It doesn't capture the congestion that's spilling back into our corridor. Okay, so this is basically like a control. Like if cars can get in and out of our system, those are ideal numbers for the travel times.
But it still is isn't the presumption that the entire Campo 2040 plan is built out? Like all
the regional model
are growing, right?
Yeah, so the regional model, these travel times are not taken from the regional model. It's a different model.
Oh, they're not?
The trips are, right?
The trips, the volume projections are taken from the travel demand model, which is a macro level. The micro level, which has just the network of our corridor, it uses the volumes, but the results for the travel times are just from the micro level.
Back to the volumes then.
Okay. So it might not be fine-grained enough to capture an actual travel time.
What's going to happen is that you won't be able to get hard numbers, because let's say there's a spill that's going through your network, you're just going to be jammed. Basically, if there's a queue ahead of our network, it will end up being just the traffic
Part
jam.
of the queue.
Part of the queue, yeah. So you can't compare queue versus queue, or
Well, I think to Ann's point, I know that we're contemplating at this point improvements to Loop 1. But at 360 and also towards Barton Hills Skyway, we're getting congestion towards Town Lake. And I remember hearing from a friend of mine back in 97 or something like that. Yeah, they're completing that highway out to Patton Ranch Road, but it's just going to be a bottleneck from there, and that's actually what did happen. And I think the proposals that have been coming out of the Oak Hill community is that the congested area of highest concern is between the Y and Patton Ranch Road, or the beginning of the new highway, that is the most significant bottleneck because of gridlock in that corridor. My thought, and I've floated this with Gerald Dougherty as well as others, is that if we can address that corridor, we might be able to significantly ameliorate the congestion that is backing up everybody. Now, what happens when you're speaking of 71 traffic and improvements, or not improvements, but increases there, maybe we need to build that into it. But do we need to have a level of service until 2040 built in the next 10 years? Or do we need something that's smaller that addresses our immediate needs, that might be able to be funded sooner and constructed sooner?
So the question he's got, because this is a US highway, I think that we're talking about that, can we build something that doesn't meet the 2040 plan volumes?
At LOSA.
I don't know if I know that you've been talking about level of service,
haven't
but
done the level
I
of
haven't,
service
yeah.
but I don't, and I know you want to talk about that, but that's not really what the team was talking about today. But can we propose something that doesn't address the Campo 24 volumes?
The plan can be amended. I mean, anything can be proposed. We can go in and amend the plan, which would mean amending the networks and possibly rerunning some of those, the model again, the regional model. Now, we can't obviously speak to the micro simulations that are being done after that, but we can go in and make edits to the networks and see what the effects would be, but that would require an amendment process, and I don't know how that would, what the steps would be for that at this point, but.
We would just have to, we just open an amendment cycle, and so.
Right.
Okay, but the point is back to, we've been talking about, and so maybe this is really what the question comes up with, is that this proposal is meeting the traffic volumes for this corridor between Hayes County and Travis County that we propose in 2040. And that's kind of our assignment from Campo at this point, is to meet those numbers. Is that correct?
That's correct, because there's so many, and one thing is, maybe I may have spoke ahead of myself there are many other projects that are going on in the region right now, so you can't really go on, and since it's a regional model, you can't go on and start tweaking something that's already been adopted in the 24 model to address a specific issue, because as odd as it sounds, you don't know how that might affect Liberty Hill or Cedar Park or another part of the network, and so we can't there are many consultants out there right now working with this data and doing other projects, so that probably is not something that I would foresee happening at this point. We are working on the 2045 model update as part of the 2045 model plan, which is using a more current 2015 base year. So every 5 years you get these updates. And in that process, there is the opportunity to go in and say, well, in 2040, maybe we weren't happy with what was happening in a certain situation, so let's go back and see what it looks like for 2045. That's something you can do, and that would culminate in the plan adoption in May of 2020.
Okay, so
But as it
the
is for
next
now,
time
you have to,
really
yeah, we are
do that.
restricted to the adopted 2040 model and the plan. You can always propose plan amendments, but as far as updating the modeling network, I don't foresee that as something that would happen.
Okay.
Now, something that, as far as, they're within that existing highway system right now, so where Joe Tanner is down to the Y. And you're right, there's a tremendous amount of congestion there. And that is acting as the filter for the remaining limits. So that's something that we did analyze. We could analyze within our micro simulation to see that, okay, if we just did something from Joe Tanner to the Y, 71, it immediately congested just outside of that. So that's where going further out to Circle Drive was able to distribute that.
Okay.
Right. So that's something that we can look at in that micro level.
And have looked at.
Right, we
And
have,
have.
right.
Okay, we've got about 15 more minutes, so I want to make sure that we get whatever questions we've got. So just want to clarify so far that the numbers that this study's based on comes from the Campo model. They're volumes that are macro systems, so make sure I'm not saying anything wrong. They're based on population, employment, all the things that Ryan's been looking at, on all of those things. They're real numbers. And the chart that was shown earlier probably was using a different math component than the one that they probably should have been using with the compound.
You're not
numbers.
projecting a trend line, right?
Okay.
You're just looking at population producing a higher trip demand in the future, right?
Yeah, so it was a resulting compound rate, yes.
Okay.
Okay, is that right, Ryan? You're looking like you.
It was the last thing Stephen said, I'm still parsing that.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, I think
instead
that's a
of
big summary.
extending the trend line with those blue bars, it's a higher trend line, and it's based on population, employment projections, and travel demand resulting from them.
Yes,
Yeah, and
it was
capacity.
back calculated to get that rate,
And
yeah.
capacity that would be available on this
I had a
project.
question about your map here. City of Austin has had policy, not prediction, of smart growth. Would you venture an opinion on whether that is working, can work, to what extent it is either working or not?
But to me, smart growth was a policy that tried to pull development off the aquifer and put it into the eastern realm. And we even had the drinking water protection zone, which was a little bit of a misnomer, and the desired development zone. And that policy is still in the books. You still get it, you can get it and send it that way. Has it worked? That's a big question. I think that we've looked at that a couple of different times. To my mind, SOS, which, I'm going to make believe that SOS is kind of a part and parcel of that smart growth policy. I think it has resulted in overall diminished growth up on the aquifer. But I think one thing that was maybe a bit of an unintended consequence, that growth really spread out spatially. And a few people predicted that, and so that's not unusual.
But the darkest blue in Hayes County is along I-35. So
and again,
I would argue that what y'all are saying about induced demand is correct, is it goes along roadways, and expanding to respond to growth will also stimulate some growth where it might not have otherwise happened as fast, correct?
Unassailable, I would agree with that completely. And my, again, that map, I've thought twice about using it. It's not as firm, as solid a data as I would like it to be because of this weird composite nature of the American Community Survey data. But again, also, I think that the I-35
I think where that might show up is the lighter shade for the piece that's between Oak Hill and Blanco County, actually.
that you'd see darker spots in it around stripping space, correct?
And again, I think the reason you're not seeing that.
Because it's averaged over the whole thing.
Is lag.
Yeah.
And it doesn't correspond with this notion that the young people say, Hayes County is blowing up. I think that's, one of the things we kicked around with the massive rooftop expansion. That would be a more specific way to do it. I personally think the I-35 corridor is growing more rapidly than this corridor, but that's not to diminish the growth that we're seeing on 290. And again, where I come in is I want the community to feel like you guys are as in control of this is going to be expected. And I think, David, your point about could you do something sooner, smaller, I think that's a reasonable thing to look into. Now, maybe that's not the way we go, but I think all of us in the room agree that what we're seeing is the enormous amount of growth that I think we're going to expect in the future. And so how we go about accommodating that or removing it, that's kind of what we're trying to figure out. And I don't know if that answers your smart growth question, but.
Well, it seems like you kind of have to, you're working for the city, so you produce data in response to requests for it, and sometimes that's policy-based, but you're also really talking about prediction, not policy. And the predictions may be based, maybe at odds with policy, but you're not responsible for, the data conflicting with people's imagined better reality, right?
I think that's always a challenge, is when you create a forecast, a population employment forecast, I think ideally you want it to be somewhere in between policy and trends.
Mm-hmm.
Is it purely trends?
Because you're predicting that policy will change the trend to some extent.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Unknown extent.
And I don't think any of us have been involved in a purely policy-driven forecast where we're going to say, wow, imagine Austin, we're only going to see growth in corridors and centers. It'd be unrealistic, we couldn't go anywhere with it. And yet I think there's some worth in trying to find that middle ground. You certainly want the trends to drive your forecast, but not so much that you ignore the policy, if that makes any sense at all.
Did you have any other slides? I
No,
don't
ma'am.
remember what the
I'm
last
done.
slide was. Okay, we have about 10 minutes. David, did you want to show something, or has your questions been answered or discussed? Or
I think I can share a little bit of data if I can pull that spreadsheet up. I don't think it's going to be tremendously illuminating. I don't know, has somebody, Bubba, did you?
while they're setting that up, is there any other questions?
That's a bunch of questions, but I think it needs to be thrown out as a wild card, if you will. That with this increased growth that you've shown us around the outside the metropolitan area, the exurbs, is going to generate an increased demand for public transportation, a rational, if there is such a thing, serious public transportation system, whether that means bus or rail line or some technology we don't even visualize.
Segways?
Maybe. I think that's going to happen. I think it's going to appear on us, and it's going to greatly modify our use of individual vehicles. And on the use of this highway system, which is like a very strong argument right now.
So what are you suggesting, Carol? I'm not sure what you're saying.
I'm saying that we, Austin at some point, I saw this happen in Los Angeles.
Built into the.
We lived in Los Angeles during the 60s and 70s when it began to grow exponentially. Los Angeles could never do public transportation. Suddenly there was a need that was so acute, they had to get serious and build a rail, and build even in that area, which was completely geologically not suited for it, an underground system. So something like that is going to happen in Austin, I'm almost certain, during the next, the period that we have, about 25 years. And that will have an impact on what we're doing.
So you're suggesting that we should put that into the plans right now? Is that what I'm understanding?
I think it should be part of a total plan, part of a total vision.
Vision.
Doesn't Campo predict some sort of mode shifting share?
We do mode,
because
right.
I agree, and I think LA is a perfect example. I was out there recently and I kept thinking, how does this place work? And then at 2 in the morning,
How does it not work?
yeah, at 2 in the morning, we're zipping around on an Uber and I said, this is what they had in mind. An endless grid punctuated by a highly articulated freeway system, which is great until there are too many people on it. But the point is that they never thought they would go to transit, but now they absolutely have to, and you can actually get on a train and go to Santa Monica, you know? So I hope that that's our future. I mean, I would have rather have the 2000 proposal have passed and we'd be all riding that system now, but we're not gonna get there that way. We're gonna have to get there maybe the LA way. But I mean, I'm hopeful that the Campo modeling takes that into account. I mean, you guys are slicing off or adding, however you want to do that.
We do. There's a built-in mode choice model that's built into the four-step, and it takes into account transit and whatever other.
Is there built-in areas for that? Because I'm not hearing where. Where are you gonna put it?
But not only modeling, but also planning,
Right.
because we'll,
gotta be
probably
both.
within the next 6 months or so, this will, I think, be the first time we've ever done a regional transit plan. Is that right, Michael? I know this is the first
believe
regional
so.
walking and biking plan campus put together. We're finishing that up, but we'll also be kicking off in the next 6 months or so a regional transit plan. So it'll look not only at the Y and Oak Hill, but the travelers we were talking about coming from Hayes County, Burnett County, Caldwell County. So we'll be looking at the system as a whole, like we were talking about, to see what kind of transit needs are out there too.
And Wade and James, we've been working with Capital Metro, which is our transit group, on bus pullouts, where they want to put a park and ride, all of those kinds of things as part of this plan. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. We got about 5 minutes because I want to honor people, so that looks scary to me, David.
We've been talking about travel times or annual average daily travel in Oak Hill, and I pulled up some data points, and in this area, I've just identified 290 Hayes County, for instance, east of Fitzhugh Road, 1826 to the city line, and I've graphed those, and it demonstrates, Steve, what you pointed out, which was that traffic has been virtually flat, or even looking at this line up here, that's actually 290 from the Y, it's mislabeled here, 290 from the Y to Patton Ranch Road, that's actually decreased, but now we've also seen that with the end of construction that maybe that was the cause of that. But I want to draw attention just to this graph, which points out that in the 2040 timeframe, you have the 2% annual growth rate, which is a standard model. And then we've had what I figured was the extrapolated value from the data that I got off of the TxDOT figures from the map, the planning model.
So that's a little higher than what Aaron.
Yeah, I got 3.5 or something like
Okay.
3.6, and you got 4.1.
I got 4.1, and it ends up that looking at the 156,614 in 2040, it ended up being about 4.1% growth rate. That's as a not a cumulative or an exponential growth.
Yeah, that's a compound rate.
Yeah, it's within a couple hundredths of a percent. So I basically came to the same conclusion that you guys came to. When it comes to the questions that I had, I came across this level of service chart on the internet, and this is not rocket science to you guys, I know, but I also looked at yet another level of service map and looked at density here, and looking at the speed at which we're traveling, a level of service D, 46 to 60, 65 miles an hour, is that level of service sufficient to handle the traffic in 2040?
So that's question's been raised a couple of different times. It seems to have been answered several different ways. So the question is, there seems to be quite a generation of growth out in the Hayes County area. Campo model right now, unless we do plan amendments or other things, has volumes that this project needs to meet.
It has volumes that are, it projects volumes based on baseline data. It's not
Okay.
really it's not a limit, or
A
it's not
limit?
something that needs to be
Okay.
met, but they are just the projected volumes.
Projected volumes. This is a federal US 290, so is there, I mean, I know we can do partial improvements of some sort, but based on the EIS that we're doing now, is there any, I mean, we looked also at trying to, we had 9 concepts to start out with at Oak Hill, is that right?
Right.
And a lot of those couldn't meet this volume data. So is there, I know we're kind of moving forward with what we've got and what we're doing and not making plan amendments, but I don't know, is there an answer to David's question in all of that?
We will analyze and determine the level of service. We try to present, I guess, information that's more informative to the community. Travel time, they're interested in how long it's going to take me to get from point A to point C, and that's what we had measured. We will, in the EIS, disclose the level of service for the schematics that we have proposed, and it's going to be probably in the range of level of service D to B. It's going to vary by location. A lot of it is influenced by ramps, location of, so it's not just a, pick a line and volume and number of lanes, and you got to look at really the whole thing. So it's going to vary by location, and we just have not made those measurements yet because it's sort of like we're getting the best facility we can that's safest, that we believe that we can move forward with, that is feasible, trying to minimize the amount of right-of-way it takes that are necessary. So really it's sort of the level of service doesn't necessarily we're not trying to reach a level of service A or B. We're not using that as a parameter as a measuring stick. We will report it, we will analyze it and look at it, but we didn't set it as like a criteria. This project has to meet a level of service X. We just did not do that.
Well, it brings me back to the question. I think the density of traffic is of equally significant importance.
Absolutely.
And that relates to safety and it relates to speed.
Yes.
And when you look at that conversation, I think it's important for the people in the room to consider the interests of Oak Hill in meeting, one, your safety and speed issues, but also the scale of the project, and can you meet the needs of the speed and access?
Well, I can tell you, if we took one lane less off the main lanes each direction, we would not be able to meet our purpose and need for the project. I can say that with confidence. It just would not work.
The purpose and need is defined by a volume in a certain
No, not
unit?
necessarily, no. It's improving mobility and safety. We have a stated purpose and need.
Yeah.
And, if the number of lanes were reduced one lane each direction, and we went and analyzed that, it's not going to significantly improve mobility. Travel times would be probably not support, Aaron, it'd probably be about what they are right now. Right. That's not an improvement.
And the safety aspect of that is that if you have incredibly long queue distance at ramps and things like that, that's causing friction with other driveways and things like that, or when you exit the freeway or enter from furniture or something like that. That's where that becomes an issue because of that queue. But yeah, level of service A is that really is in the Austin metropolitan area. That's that's
A
running around.
unicorn.
Right.
I don't think it's gonna happen.
That's 2:00 in the morning on Christmas Eve, you know, everybody's already home. You know, that really is where you have more lanes than cars, on the road. So that's really not, you know, that's not, we can't achieve the level of service A, during the rush hour.
And really, you don't want to either.
Right, because then that is a huge, infrastructure.
So to sum this up, because I do really want to honor people's time, is they're looking at, there's evaluation criteria that you'll be looking at. Those deal with mobility and safety, not necessarily the level of service, although that will be in a document that will be available by the end of the year.
It'll be in the EIS, yes.
Okay.
So there isn't a level of service target in TxDOT policy for the highway capacity manual?
Is there a level of service? James says no.
Okay. So when you're planning, quarter planning, you're not aiming for that?
I think as a general rule of thumb, you would like to get a
Yeah, I
decent
thought it was
level of
about C or
service.
D.
But I don't know that there's a mandate that says that you need to do this. I don't know, Aaron, do you remember anything like that that's?
I mean, generally, when you do traffic planning, you definitely want at least a D, and it changes for rural and urban. It could be C for very urbanized area, or if it's rural, you could need
There's
less
probably some
D, E.
guidelines in the.
Okay,
in the
some
plan.
planning
But
criteria.
I don't think there's a mandate.
I wanted to clarify the travel times that I have there were not hard numbers, right? Those were just a relative comparison for the alternatives for our study area. So I said it would take 3.5 minutes compared to the alternatives or the no bill.
So
You understand?
the basic idea at the end, when you'll see in this document by the end of the year, is you'll get numbers for A, numbers for B, and numbers for no build. So that you don't, C, yeah, A, C, sorry.
A and C and no
A
build.
and C and no build.
Yeah.
We dropped out B somewhere a long time ago, but that's kind of the general idea. I do want to thank you very much for being here today. I greatly appreciate it. Yep, Robert?
I have one
It
big
can't be a
question.
comment though, or I'm
It's
gonna
not
cut
a
you off.
comment.
Okay, question.
What, before you summarize everything, what would be the next step? Where are we going from this meeting to sum it all up today? We tried to address traffic numbers and different routes and corridors, and we tackled a lot of things, but what is the next step from here? Where are we going from here? Because more of the same is just not gonna cut it. It just,
Well, I think what we got here,
We're
we've
not
got a couple we are moving, I guess. Got a couple of action items. David Richardson, we're giving him some City of Austin contact information for the city data. Steve Beers wants the TxDOT, where you find the different service, or however volumes for the different things that he couldn't find. Also, the PowerPoint, you've got a hard copy of that, but we will put it up. Yeah, I can send it out to you or do whatever you want with that. Basically, what happens is the project, this meeting, and I'm sorry if I didn't clarify that, was to provide you information on how we got the traffic data, how we work with the Campo plan, how we are building the 3 lanes and the access roads based on those numbers, and to answer any questions that you have.
Right.
The project team will be finishing up the environmental study by hopefully the end of this year. They're still working on that. That data will become available to the public. And then there'll be a public hearing on that end of this year, first of next year, hopefully into this year. And then at that point in time, any other tweaks or whatever to that, they'll come out at the end of the year with either it will be A or C, not B. Or no build. That's correct. And then it'll take about, after that project gets turned in to TxDOT, actually, there will be some sort of decision called a record of decision on whether you build or no build based on that, which I would assume would be sometime next summer.
next summer.
So that's generally the idea.
And this video will be uploaded to the...
I got to see if we could hear everything on there or not, if you can hear what our discussions are. You can, okay, then yeah, I think we can put it up on the website.
Or a
In a
transcript
day
of
or
it.
two?
Or a transcript of it, one of the two, yep.
In a day or two?
I have no idea. I tried to pull this together kind of at the last minute when people said they couldn't come, so I just wanted to see how the video worked.
On OakHillParkway.com.
I'm sure that'll be where it'll be, if it all works.
Thanks.
Cool. All right, thank you so much for your time. You guys are great. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you.